Hey everyone, Leslie Rice here, creator of The Signal. We've got a lot going on, so I'll try to keep it brief. First up, I'm proud to announce that The Signal has a new home on the web. Over at www.signalhorrorpodcast.com, you can find all the great content we offer on our podcast and a lot besides, including archives where you can listen to past episodes, a staff page where we're working to showcase the people whose talent and hard work makes this show possible, and even a page just for fans who contribute to the show. That's right, those who contribute an appropriate amount either through the site itself or directly at patreon.com/signalobscura will get some special recognition. Just $2 nets you every new episode of the show 2 days early, and just a little more can net you access to fan-exclusive episodes like our 2017 Christmas special, updates, and more. For those who want to contribute in other ways, be sure to like, share, rate, and review the episodes. The more people know about the show, the more people listen, and hopefully the more people listen, the more we can improve the program. So please, let the world know. After all, what's the worst that could happen?
And that's 2 hours late. Lovely. Thanks again, Dad. Just a lovely evening.
Alex, I'm home.
Great.
I'm sorry I'm late. I got held up working with a new consultant at the office. I'm onto something important.
You know what? That's great, Dad. I'm glad you found something important.
Look, Alex, I'm sorry I missed dinner, but I'm here now. With some extra help, maybe I can take a break this weekend. I promise I'll make it up to you.
Oh, yeah, I know, Dad. You've been real careful to mention that every day this week. Look, Dad, I know that what you're working on is important, but can you just stop pretending that I even come in a close second?
Alex...
You know what? Just enjoy your dinner. I'm going to bed. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow.
Alex?
Well, looks like I'm in for the night. Huh. What's this? Chapter 2 is now available from The Signal, a horror fiction podcast. I don't think I ever subscribed to that. Oh well. Might as well give it a shot. It's not like my night can get any worse.
This is The Signal. Point of origin, unknown. Destination, unclear. It carries with it fragments of other places, other times, stories from unfathomable pits of darkness, and worlds of unquenchable, all-consuming light. These tales of realities both unimaginably distant and terrifyingly close are woven into, around, and through The Signal. Hello, listener, and welcome to The Signal. Here, you'll find tales to frighten and fascinate, some from worlds that you will barely recognize, and others that are all too close to home. Today, we'll be exploring a race whose rewards are matched only by its risks, visit a neighborhood where human nature collides with the unknown, and see a place of healing whose descent into notoriety has left a scar on our popular consciousness. We will also, as always, be reaching out to you with a new test pattern, giving you the opportunity to add your voice to our own. But that's for later. Now, it's time to introduce you to our first story. There is a primal, elemental joy in the simple act of running. Feeling the sensation of speed as wind whips past your face, the exhilaration of blood pumping through your veins, muscles testing their limits. And yet, In a world where people run for the fun of getting some fresh air, or even to test their endurance and speed against others in a competition, it's easy to forget the other side of the coin. The subject of our first tale, written by Devlin and narrated by Marie Mitchell, is about to be reminded that when the stakes are high enough, even that most enjoyable of activities can be taken to its primal roots when people only ran when there was something terrible behind them. So, listener, to prepare you should you have to run for your life, we present you with The Ultimate Race.
Every year in our town, there is a race. But it's not just any race. In this race, anything goes and the winner gets to have their deepest, darkest desire filled. You'd like someone dead? They'll hand you the gun or do it for you. Want $1 million? It's in your bank account before you even get home. Not only that, however, but during the race, all bets are off. Within the confines of the racetrack, anything and everything becomes legal. Whatever it takes to win. Competitors aren't allowed to bring weapons with them, but if you manage to kill someone on the racetrack to get ahead, you'll never be held accountable. It's considered part of the risks for the incredible rewards. And so, year after year, people sign their lives away to take part, sometimes literally. This year, I was one of those people. My family is small, just myself, my younger sister, and our mother. She's been raising us alone since our father died of cancer when I was only 5 years old. My sister was too young to remember it, but I remember watching him fade away and die before my eyes. Now our mother is sick too, and she needs a heart transplant. Of all the things, I sometimes wonder if we're cursed. Of course, you can't just come by a free heart, and that's why I signed up for the race. If I could win, I could get my mother to the top of the transplant list. I could save her. I could save both myself and my sister the pain of having to watch another parent die. I didn't care about the free-for-all that many people use the race as an excuse for. I just wanted to win and get that heart. I just wanted to save my mother and be the hero. How stupid I was. The competitors gathered at the starting line the morning of the race. Like previous years, there was close to perhaps 100 runners or more. It was like those marathons you see on TV where a giant group of people move en masse, like a giant wave of ants moving to devour a carcass. Only these people were even deadlier. A good deal of these ants weren't likely to make it to the finish line. That was exactly why a lot of them were here. A chance to kill with impunity. It attracted a surprising amount of people. Hey. Oh. Oh no. Hey. It was my friend Joe. My heart dropped. Why was he here? You're racing this year too, huh? He asked. I pointed to the race number displayed on my chest and shrugged. Me too. He laughed and slapped me on the shoulder. So, what's your deepest, darkest desire? What's big enough to get you out here with all these crazies? A heart transplant for my mother, I replied. Joe nodded and mouthed like it suddenly made sense. You? Perhaps not as dire or noble as your cause, but money. He shrugged. Joe also had a younger sister, and although our family was very far from well off, Joe's family seemed to struggle even harder. He came to school without lunch more often than he did. He'd been wearing the same shoes for the last 2 years now, and I'm pretty sure that he was using the same school bag he'd gotten in the 2nd grade of elementary. His family could certainly benefit from the money. There was no denying that. Competitors to your starting positions! An announcement blared across the track from the speaker set up on either side of the road. The course changed every year. This year, it would be taking them through the mountains, down past the local river, around the school, and finally ending at one of the biggest parks in town. It wasn't a terribly long race, all things considered, but you tell that to 100 people trying to kill each other for the grand prize. Good luck, hey? Joe smiled again. How could he be so happy? He was surrounded by people who for the next hour or so would be trying to kill him. May the best man win. Yeah. I smiled meekly. If life worked that way, we wouldn't be in this predicament in the first place. The starting gun went off, and like murderous lemmings, the crowd of racers surged forth. I wasn't even 10 meters down the track when already I had to jump over fallen bodies and dodge projectiles coming my way. I've seen the race enough times to know how it begins every year. It's always the same. A rush of bodies, the initial thrill of the chance to kill. A good number of people go down, and for them the race is over before it even began. Ambulances and cleanup crews stood nearby, ready to pick up the pieces once the rush was over. My plan was simple. Stick to the back of the pack initially, let the lead runners pick each other off, maintain a good pace, and as the finish line drew closer, I'd make my move. Whatever that move needed to be. In the week leading up to the race, I questioned myself often over whether I could do it. Could I kill a person? If it was for my mother, for my sister, could I kill another human being? What if it was just me and one other person drawing in on the finish line? Would I be able to take that person's life with my own hands in order to save my mother's? Honestly, I didn't know. I wanted to believe that I couldn't, but who really knows what dark, horrible acts a person can commit in the heat of the moment? Phew, that was close. It was Joe. He kept a steady pace beside me as we followed the violent stampede up the mountain. Bodies continued to drop like flies. I jumped over a man with his skull crushed in. A bloody rock lay beside him, discarded like he was. I remembered him from the front of the pack. That's why you never started at the front. Few spectators lined the mountain road. Most of them would be waiting near the finish line where the real action was. Nobody cared about the insignificant ants who died early on. It was the furious battles near the finish line that people camped out for days to secure their spot for. That was what the crowd really wanted. Blood. Not just any blood, but the kind of blood that could only be spilled by those on the verge of having their biggest wish granted, or about to have it taken away. So, your parents agreed to you doing this? I asked Joe as we reached the top of the mountain. It gave us a view of the race ahead. There was probably 20, maybe 30 runners ahead of us. A few bodies lay by the side of the road. Not the biggest starting race massacre ever, but it still wasn't pretty. The lead was about 300 meters down the road, a physically imposing man with something large in his hand. Probably the rock that had taken down at least a few of the bloodied bodies lying nearby. "They don't know I'm here," Joe replied, leaping over a hand grasping for his ankle. "They don't know?" "Nope." Joe smiled as if it was all just a big game. "Although they probably do now, huh?" "Are you crazy?" "Maybe. Did you ask your mother first?" "Well, not in so many words, no." It was true. I mentioned the race to her, but never specifically said I was taking part. But I think she knew deep down that that's why I brought it up anyway, and she never objected. That was permission enough for me. "Look out!" Joe grabbed my shirt and yanked me back. Something whizzed by my head and landed by the side of the road. A knife? Competitors weren't allowed to bring knives. It was strictly what you found on the way. A woman coming down the track behind us spotted the knife and slowed down to pick it up. She turned to us and smiled. It was a feral smile, like a starved animal about to take down its first prey in weeks. It was also the last smile that would ever touch her lips. Mere moments after she picked up the knife, a rifle sounded and the woman's head split open. The knife hit the ground, followed by her crumpled body. The sound of a taser drew my attention from the sight before me. One of the spectators on the mountain descent was twitching as he hit the ground. A man in rad gear spoke into his mic before the body was dragged off. Joe and I looked at one another and started running again. Just need to keep moving. "You've got some blood on your..." Joe pointed to my face. His hand was shaking. I just kept running. It was all I could do. We reached the river. By now, maybe 10 people were in front of us. We'd reached the part of the race where most of the runners were spaced out enough to just keep running. Other than the sound of our breathing, our feet hitting the dirt, and the trickle of the river, everything was quiet. I was okay with that. Quiet was nice. The sight of that woman's head exploding haunted me. She broke the rules. She picked up a weapon tossed onto the track by a spectator. Everyone knew what happened when you broke the rules. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. It was like her head just exploded. Blood and bone showered in every direction. "I don't know if I can do it," I muttered. "Do what?" Joe's feet continued to hit the ground in sync with my own. "Kill a person? I don't think I can do it." "You don't have to kill anyone to win the race. Stop thinking about it." I know, but you saw that guy up there. You think he's just going to let us peacefully pass by and take first place? Probably not. No. A scream sounded ahead of us. Another competitor down? What are you going to do with the money if you win? I asked. Joe didn't seem like the type to really care about material possessions, but with $1 million in front of you, well, that could change a person. Send Dad to that training course he needs to get the promotion at work, finally. You know they've skipped him over 3 years in a row now simply because he can't drive the forklift and they're too scummy to pay for his license? I didn't know that. I'm sorry. And it'll let Mom quit her night job. And I want to get Mary some new clothes and such for school. She doesn't say anything, but I know the other kids tease her. They teased me. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded as we ran. We're about to lose the house, too, Joe said after a few moments. We have nowhere else to go. I don't know what to do. Even if I got another part-time job, another 5 part-time jobs, it wouldn't help. This is our last chance. No one can do this but me. Joe hit the ground in front of me, sending me tumbling over the top of him. Boo-hoo, what a sad story. Let's all have a pity party about it. One of the runners was standing above us with a large, thick tree branch in his hand. He must have been hiding behind one of the trees. I turned over and saw a body lying in the river. That must have been the scream we heard. The branch, connected with my torso and pain, exploded throughout my side. Another strike, this time my shoulder. His aim was getting higher. Another hit and... Joe's foot connected with the man's jaw and sent him flying. Joe scrambled for the branch before the man caught his bearings, and before he knew what was happening, it was all over. Joe battered his face in. Over and over, the branch came down until there was nothing but a pulpy, bloody mess in the mud. Joe stood up and turned to me. His face and upper body were almost entirely red. I opened my mouth a few times, but Joe just dropped the stick and held out a hand. Come on, we're not winning this race sitting around here. I swallowed my words and looked at his bloody hand, still in shock. He'd just murdered a man right in front of me. He was about to kill us, sure, but I'd known Joe since we were 5 years old. We grew up together. He was always so sweet and kind to everyone. The joker who never took anything to heart. They are getting further ahead of us. I shook my head and took his hand. It was sticky. Yeah, right, sorry. Come on, let's go. I took one last look at the body and started running again. The longer I ran with Joe, the more I realized that things were going to get very complicated. Only one person could win. It may not be either of us, but if it came down to it, what would we do? I needed that heart transplant for my mother. He needed that money for his family to survive. It wasn't like either of us could just give up for the other. We neared the school. There were a few more spectators here. We were closing in on the end. Do you hear that? Hear what? Listen. There was a fight up ahead. It was the big guy who'd been in the lead. A woman and 2 men were circling him, his brow cut and dripping blood into his eye. One of the men, tall but skinny, had something small and sharp in his hand. The woman was swinging a chain she'd probably lifted from the trash cans. Joe put a hand across my chest and brought a finger to his lips. He pointed through the middle of the school. Leave them be. If we go this way, we can avoid them. It's a bit longer, but... Hey! The big guy saw us and called out. Shit. You go deal with them, the tall man said. The smaller one started running towards us. He had a baseball bat in hand. It appeared to be wrapped in something sharp. Barbed wire? Where did he manage to steal that from? Run! Joe and I took off at full speed. I was tired. The run itself was wearing me down, but the rise and fall of adrenaline was taking its toll on me as well. I didn't know how much longer I could keep doing this. My legs burned like molten lava and my chest heaved like it was going to explode. Ah! Joe fell to the ground once more. The back of his head was bleeding. The man had thrown the baseball bat at him and was quickly closing in. Joe fell to the ground once more. The back of his head was bleeding. The man had thrown the baseball bat at him and was quickly closing in. I picked it up. There was no time. As the man got closer, I swung with all my might. The sound of his jaw cracking was a sound I'd remember for a long time. Joe had saved me before. Now we were even. Are you okay? Yeah, I think so. I'm just bleeding. Come on, let's keep moving. I held a hand out and helped Joe back to his feet. He was a little wobbly, but we pressed on before the others could follow. Once we clear the school, we'll be in first place. There's only 500 meters between here and the finish line. We'll make it. Joe smiled. More and more blood was pouring from the back of his head. Are you sure you're okay? Stop asking me and keep running. We cleared the school gate when we heard it. It was an almost inhuman growl. I turned. It was the big guy, covered in blood. He was holding the woman's chain in one hand and what looked like a steel pole in the other. He hurled it towards us and was moving before it even hit the ground. The finish line was straight ahead, the park at the end of the street. Spectators lined the road and wild cheers went up. It would appear we were the final three, and the last leg was about to begin. The crowd wanted blood. They always wanted blood. It was only another 500 meters. I kept thinking to myself, just keep moving. Nothing else matters. Just keep moving. He can't touch you once you pass that finish line. Nothing else in the world matters but being the first across that line. Then everything will be okay. My legs pumped across the hard asphalt. It was awkward running with the bat, but I refused to let it go. Joe was not far behind me. I couldn't turn to look, it would be precious wasted time. He's gaining, Joe screamed. So run faster! It was all I could get out. My entire body and mind were focused on moving forward and nothing else. 400 meters. Already, I was slowing down. I could feel it. I couldn't keep up this pace much longer. Not anymore. The cheers of the crowd were drowned out by my heartbeat throbbing in my head and chest and throat. 300 meters. Joe caught up to me. The cut on his head was still bleeding a scary amount of blood, but it didn't appear to be holding him back. Sweat poured down the side of his face, mingling with the dried, caked-on blood. His face was sickly pale, but he didn't say a word. We just kept running. 200 meters. I could hear the footsteps behind us. He was closing in. I could almost feel his breath on my neck. I could hear the chain hitting the ground as he ran. For such a big guy, he sure had some stamina. The finish line was in sight. People were standing up and cheering, urging us on. Not to win, but to fight. Blood. They wanted more blood. 100 meters. I tasted asphalt. So close, yet so far. I don't remember exactly what sound I made as my face planted into the ground at full speed, but I'm sure it wasn't dignified. The baseball bat flew out of my hand and clattered nearby. This is it, I thought. It's all over. I'm a dead man and right before the finish line. How fitting. I'm sorry, Mom. I tried. A huge weight suddenly pressed down on my back. An almost maniacal laugh sounded near my ear. The crowd grew even louder. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. I braced myself for another impact, the last one of my life, no doubt. Just what the audience wanted, a grand finale. The impact never came. There was a thud followed by cursing. I turned to see Joe kicking the man in the face again. The finish line was right there, and here he was, helping me out once more. The big guy's face turned murderous. He swung the chain over his head and then towards Joe's side. He couldn't get out of the way in time and crumpled to the ground. You think you little shits are going to keep me from my prize? Think again. Pain exploded through my head once more as his fist connected with my cheek. He grabbed Joe and yanked him up by his t-shirt, delivering a swift punch to his jaw as well. Joe just smiled at him. Oh, you like that, did you? You some kind of sicko kid, is that why you're here? Joe said nothing. I wasn't sure he could. His lip was busted and his jaw bruised. He just kept smiling. He then held up his other hand. He was holding the other end of the chain. Before the big guy knew what was going on, he wrapped it around his neck, planted his feet against the guy's chest, and pushed with all his might. He grabbed feebly at his neck, the veins popping out and his face rapidly turning red. Joe just kept pushing against him with his feet and pulling on the chain, not letting go even as the body slid off me to the ground. He just kept pulling tighter and tighter. The big guy's eyes bulged, his breath rasped. The crowd cheered even louder. He was going to kill him. I looked over. My heart dropped. My mother and sister were in the crowd. Why? Why was she here? Why did she bring my sister here? She's only 12. Too young to see any of this. I didn't want them to see any of this. My heart dropped even further. Next to her was Mary, Joe's sister. His parents were nowhere in sight, presumably at work. "Joe." I called out, but my voice refused to work. My throat was so dry I could barely swallow. My head was spinning. I got up to my hands and knees and tried again. "Joe." The big guy had stopped moving. Joe kept pulling on the chain like his life depended on it. "Joe!" I put a hand on the back of his leg. He looked down at me, eyes full of fear and confusion and adrenaline. He was like an animal cornered with nowhere to go. He looked awful. "Joe, you can let go now. He's not breathing." Joe turned back to the man, and after a few more moments, he dropped the chain. He fell to his knees beside me. "It's just us now." "It is. What are we going to do?" "We need to finish this race." I stood up on wobbly legs. The finish line was just there, 100 meters ahead of us. I put an arm over Joe's shoulder and we stumbled forward, together. The crowd was cheering. It was no finale they'd ever seen before. I could hear voices calling for blood, calling for one more bloody finish. I could hear my name coming from somewhere. I turned back and my family were gone. Did I imagine them? It didn't matter. Forward. We kept moving forward, step after step. Blood ran down my face and dripped onto the road below. Joe was silent, one arm across his battered side and the other helping to hold me up. What a sight we must have been. We reached the finish line and stopped. We made it. One of us was about to win, and that's when it hit me again. One of us. Only one person could win. Joe smiled again. "Hell of a race, huh?" "Hell of a race," I agreed. "This is it." "Yep." A silence fell between us as the crowd got even louder. I could hear one of the race commentators blaring over the loudspeakers, but I had no idea what he was saying. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Joe began. I opened my mouth to reply when he let go of me and shoved me over the finish line. I hit the ground hard. I won. I looked up, confused. Joe was still smiling, but it no longer reached his eyes. "Your mother needs that heart. I can't keep that from her. She was one of the few people who was kind to me growing up, you know? She never said a word, but she would always give us extra food when we came over to play, or tucked a few bills into our pocket when we weren't looking." I didn't know what to say. Tears filled my eyes. I was so confused. "I took out an insurance policy before the race, just in case." He gave a small laugh. "Even if I didn't win, well, I wanted to make sure that my family would be okay. This is the only way both of us wins. Watch out for my sister for me, will you? And give your mother my regards. Her pain is going to be over very soon." He looked around as though for the last time. "It's so cold," he whispered. It was the last thing he ever said. Everything afterwards was a blur. Ambulance officers rushed towards Joe while I was picked up and put on a stretcher myself. The race organizers were congratulating me at the same time medics were plugging a drip into my veins. They told me later I was suffering from blood loss and heat exhaustion. They were amazed that I made it to the finish line at all. My mother got her heart transplant. Turned out the big guy was a perfect match. Joe's family also got their money. Unbeknownst to them, he'd taken out a life insurance policy on his own life before the race, a sort of backup measure in case he didn't win. Joe bled to death from his wounds. He was dead before they reached the hospital. I never got the chance to say goodbye to him. Say thank you. Because of Joe, my mother is still alive. Because of Joe, I'm still alive. Mary got her new clothes and books for school. She hasn't been the same since the day of that race, though. She doesn't speak very much and just spends all her time running.
Huh, weird. But not bad. Shit! Well, there goes the power. Damn it. Dad? Great. asleep at his desk. Typical. Guess it's up to me then. Here we go. Frickin' basement. Need a little light. That's better. Now, where's the fuse box? It should be at the back of the house. Ah! Jesus! Why do we need so many shelves of useless crap? Whoa, what the hell was that? Alright, keep cool. Okay, if you can't hear it, you can't get freaked out. Okay, let's just keep listening to that show. That was fun, right? And play.
And while running for your life may be able to save you from some threats, others are far more insidious. For what good is a strong pair of legs if the monsters are in your head? And that, of course, brings us to the subject of today's local broadcast, courtesy of Phil Andrews of Waltham, Massachusetts. Phil is a longtime horror fan who grew up in New York City, meaning he's likely seen scarier things on the subway than anything you'll find on this show. Still, as a major fan of horror cinema, such as Event Horizon and the oft-overlooked Grave Encounters, Phil's used to having his terrors a full screen length away. All the while, blissfully unaware that a mere half hour to his north festers a beacon of madness. So Phil, I hope you're listening, because the time has come to explore the Danvers State Mental Hospital. While the term mental asylum has taken on many negative connotations in modern society, it's important to examine the term itself to see the altruism at the core of the idea. An asylum should be just that, a shelter for those whose damaged minds and crippled spirits render them incapable of surviving in a world turned terrifying and inhospitable. However, the science of mental health, for most of human history, was often less geared toward treating and caring for the mentally disabled, and more focused on locking them away from the eyes of a world that would prefer to forget them. What actual treatments patients could expect were less an attempt to heal a fractured psyche, and more tantamount to torture, either meant to force unruly patients to behave, or were so based in esoteric theory that one questions the sanity of those that created them. Fortunately, by the end of the 19th century, new schools of thought were forming around mental health, with new inroads to the human psyche being developed and an emphasis on humane treatment coming to the fore. One such pioneer, Thomas Story Kirkbride, was among those paving the way to a new and brighter chapter in the dark history of mental health. Realizing that the dark, cramped, and prison-like structures of most mental health facilities of the time were doing as much damage to the patients' minds as any psychosis, Kirkbride created plans for a new breed of psychiatric hospital. According to the Kirkbride plan, new institutions would have more open space and views of the surrounding hills and nature, and plenty of each were to be found in Massachusetts. With the nation still healing from the mental wounds of the Civil War, a sprawling new facility was planned, which many hoped would serve as a beacon of hope in a dark time. Still, from the beginning, the Danvers State Mental Hospital suffered from certain issues. First, the choice of location, Hawthorne Hill. Though beautiful, its namesake and former resident, John Hawthorne, had a somewhat dark history with mental health himself. As one of the judges of the Salem witch trials, he had presided over one of the largest cases of mass hysteria the country had ever seen, and to build a mental hospital on the site could be seen as either a symbol of the future overtaking the past, or as a dark omen of things to come. Second, the $1.5 million price tag of the massive institution raised some eyebrows in a country recovering from the massive financial strain of a war that had cost American citizens not just their lives, but their livelihoods. Still, as construction was completed, their concerns melted away in awe at the spectacle of the place. Comprising over 40 buildings, the Danvers Hospital quickly earned the nickname the Castle on the Hill from locals. At first, the hospital seemed to live up to its goal, to provide cutting-edge treatment and a humane place for tortured souls and minds. They refused to use restraints on patients unless they were actively attempting to harm themselves or others, and provided their charges with productive work in the gardens and kitchens. Some small speed bumps, such as an influx of violent criminals that subsequently had to be shipped to another, more secure facility occurred, but by and large, Danvers was every inch the sanctuary for the unsound that it had sought to be. But, as with so many things, time changed that. As with any success story, Danvers began to attract more business. Additional patients brought in from near and far, and soon the facility, originally meant to house up to 450 patients, had ballooned to nearly 2,000, more than 4 times its capacity. Danvers' considerable budget for upkeep also began to suffer. No new staff could be added to control the increasingly unruly and violent population of lunatics that roamed the halls with little oversight. Faced with the prospect of losing control, the staff resorted to more and more extreme measures to retain their place as heads of the facility. Newly developed psychosurgical techniques such as the prefrontal or ice pick lobotomy were used. Full restraints would become commonplace. The building's aging generators and power supply began to collapse, brownouts creating a security nightmare, and the castle-like structures of the asylum, without the care or repairs they needed, began to crumble. By 1939, the situation had become appalling. The population had grown to 2,350 patients, and there were nearly 300 deaths among them a year, not all of them easily explained as natural causes. Slowly but surely, each of the buildings was shut down, and like those inside, Danvers faced a lingering death. One which lasted until 1992, when the mental hospital was finally declared closed for good by the state. But by that time, Danvers' reputation had become infamous, leaving a lasting scar on the American psyche. Rumors spread about unnecessary patient cruelty, with some even suggesting that certain members of the staff had turned to occultism in their quest to bring peace to the tortured souls within. These tales and the crumbling Victorian towers would embed themselves in the mind of one Howard Phillips Lovecraft, a New England writer of weird fiction who would later dub his fictionalized version of Danvers as Arkham Asylum, a fictional institution that continues to inspire nightmares in our popular culture to this day. The location itself was used for the shooting of the modern psychological horror classic Session 9, and the rumors around it, combined with those surrounding some neighboring institutions, served as the basis for the plot of the film Grave Encounters and many others. If that was the end of things, though, merely a dark chapter in the history of psychiatry and some pop culture footnotes, then perhaps that would be for the best. However, in recent years, the dark cloud that hangs over Danvers has cast its shadow once again. In 2005, a developer purchased the property in the hopes of renovating it, creating apartment buildings for those in need. Things seemed fine until 2007, when a mysterious fire swept through the development. Oddly, only the new construction was touched, and nothing of the original structure burned. In spite of this strange occurrence, Danvers opened in 2008, though current residents tend to complain that the construction is of poor quality, and that the place tends to fall apart more quickly than it should. For now, that seems to be the extent of the misfortune that hovers around Danvers, and one can only hope that all the darkness in its past remains there.
Okay, listening to that was a terrible idea. Where the hell is that fuse box? How fucking big is this basement? I know I should have hit the back wall by now. Hello? That can't be real. Mom? Mom? Dad! Dad!
What is horror? Some slavering monster waiting in the dark? A hand rising from a fresh grave under the moonlight? A pair of red eyes peering up at you from the darkness at the bottom of the basement steps? Diverse as they are, all of these situations have one thing in common: the very essence of horror. They are subversions of the natural order, glimpses of a world where the rules no longer apply, where the familiar has been rendered terrifyingly unrecognizable. That begs the question, dear listener: does horror lie in the situation itself, or in the reactions of those encountering it? To answer that question, we turn to our next tale from Matt Dymersky. When a mysterious object appears in a small neighborhood, its residents are alarmed to find monsters in their midst. And not all of those monsters come from the Black Square.
It was simply there on one humid morning about 6 weeks ago. I walked out of my house, looked right on the way to my car, and there it was, a black square in the middle of the street. I thought it was a strange box or something. Thinking nothing of it, I went off to get lunch. But it was still there when I returned, and this time the neighborhood kids that usually collectively played in the yard to my house's left were now instead off to the right. Circled around the black square, they were talking, laughing, and poking at it with sticks. Something didn't seem right about the scene, so I got out of my car and stood for a moment, watching. What was wrong here? It hit me. They weren't poking at it, they were poking into it. One of the local teenagers was sitting on the porch behind me, so I knew the kids were being looked after. It was some strange prank or something. Well, I'd hear about it later. I headed back inside and returned to writing that day's story. Around 8 in the evening, someone began knocking on our front door. 2 of my roommates were in their rooms with the doors open, but we were all playing an online game together, so we ignored it and hoped the guy in the room downstairs would get it. He either didn't hear it or didn't care, so we sat there listening to the pounding and knocking for about 15 minutes before one of my roommates logged off the game and stormed down to the front door. I heard, "What the hell do you want? None of us are parked in your goddamn spot. We never park in your spot." That didn't sound good. I left my computer and slid down the hallway to see what was going on. They'd told me stories about Bill and how he insisted that one section of the sidewalk was for his food truck. Apparently, he'd go around at literally any time of day or night, knocking on every single door in the neighborhood until he found the offender. This time, Bill was looking not for a car owner, but for the perpetrator of the Black Square prank. After much arguing, he finally moved on to the next house, but I couldn't go back to playing our game. Instead, I wandered out under evening orange and headed down the street. The black square was odd. Its angle seemed to be changing to match me, and I moved my head back and forth a few times rapidly to confirm that it always looked exactly square from any angle. Anton was sitting in his open garage in a lawn chair as I approached. He handed a man a bag, pocketed a stack of cash, and coughed and leaned back. The stranger hurried away without looking at me. It was not an unusual sight. Standing in Anton's driveway, which ran straight at the black square and Bill's house beyond, I asked, "Hey, what is this thing?" "No idea, man," he responded, "but it's got me on edge. It's just been there all day. I thought maybe somebody was scoping me out, but it doesn't do nothing." I didn't want to get too close to it, so I picked up a stick. "Kids were messing with this earlier, right? Did anything happen?" "Nah." It was strange. There seemed to be some sort of scaling perspective at work. As I moved closer to the square, it grew larger in my sight than the change in distance warranted. Far away, the effect had been imperceptible, but up close, it was extremely unsettling. It felt almost as if the black square was looming up to encompass me and might even leap out at any moment. It was becoming increasingly obvious that this was no prank. The sides were exactly equal in length from what I could see, and absolutely nothing showed or reflected in its surface. I'd seen Vantablack nanofabric in person once before, and that super black material had definitely left an impression on me. It had felt like staring into absolute void, and I had that same feeling now. The only difference was that my stick encountered no resistance as it moved forward. I took one step. The stick still moved freely ahead. Was it past the threshold yet? It was disturbingly impossible to tell because the square always seemed to be facing me, so I couldn't tilt left or right and get a look from the side. The square also got bigger faster than it should have with each step, so I couldn't get a good idea of exactly where it began and ended. Worst of all, the forward perspective had no landmarks and no shadows. It felt as if I was inside a television show and reaching forward into a CGI background. The studio lights off screen were still lighting the stick, and I was reaching into something that didn't really exist. I swung my branch left and right. There were no edges to strike either. The pointed end traversed from ultra black to the green of Bill's lawn and back with no resistance. It was then I truly understood that we were in trouble. "Hey, Anton? What's up?" He was usually one to play it cool, but I could tell by his subtly concerned expression that I must have looked very strange standing in front of complete nothingness. How to phrase it? "Let's make sure nobody goes near this." He nodded and gave a nervous laugh. We didn't have any sort of housing association or community building, so it would really be up to word of mouth. Bill was 2 houses past ours now, still knocking on doors, and he was doing a decent accidental job of warning everyone. A few neighbors had come out onto their lawns to stare at the thing, and I saw Idil emerging one lawn over. While studying the black square from afar, she shivered and pulled her headscarf a little closer. I smoothed down my shirt reflexively as she approached. She stopped on the sidewalk just short of Anton's driveway. "What is the square?" We just shook our heads. "You call police?" she asked, looking at me. Anton leaned back in his seat and watched me. Put on the spot, all I could say was, I don't think so." She was visibly confused. "Why not?" Anton snickered. "Cops don't come here, girl." "Police don't come this area?" "Nah, they do, but trust me, you don't want them. They don't come here to help."
"Oh."
She looked down at the ground, then over at the black square, and then to her front door. She departed without a word. The rest of the neighbors began to emerge from their homes as Bill pissed them off in sequence, but we did not meet or talk beyond the distant glances of confusion and confirmation. I didn't like that strange square in the street, not one bit, but there wasn't much to do about it. A few people were taking pictures, so I went back inside and put my phone on the charger to do the same. My roommates and I locked the house up tight that night. We couldn't see the black square from any of our windows, but the mere knowledge of its presence was like a chill on the air. I was the night owl of the 4 of us, and when the others went to bed, I quickly stacked boxes full of junk from the basement to block the windows, just in case. In the morning, nobody commented in approval of the boxes, but neither did they take them down. I stepped outside to confirm that the anomaly was still there. This time I took pictures. I'd seen more than my share of movies and shows about creepy anomalies, but it was another thing having one actually show up outside my house. In person, there's a balance of risk versus curiosity, and there was nothing we could do about the square without endangering ourselves. We couldn't get too close to it because who knew what would happen, and we certainly couldn't go inside it. So it sat there, and in large part, we ignored it in our day-to-day lives. But there's also another kind of risk, the unknown, and the stress effects on your community and on your health. Each morning for a week, I would look to my right at that eerie black square and wonder if I was being watched. Or worse, was it some kind of hole from somewhere that might let in horrific entities beyond our understanding? Or hell, even just basic clawed creatures we could understand would be horrifying. A simple wolf or bear on the loose on our street would have been an emergency warranting help, and here we were with the possibility of literally anything appearing at any time. On a random night that about 8 people were over to play board games, Idil asked again if I would call someone. This time I agreed. But who and how? I did find some numbers for 2 local news channels. I sent in my pictures, but they laughed at me and said they looked photoshopped. I insisted that no, it was literally just a black square, and they told me to call back when I had something scarier. The military was an obvious answer too, but how does one call the military? I didn't exactly have a phone number for the military. Each night for a week, I waited on hold with various desks, bases, and institutions, repeating my story verbatim each time. A strange anomaly has appeared in our neighborhood, and I need someone to come take a look at it. Most secretaries hung up on me immediately, but I finally got one that laughed. He asked, "Watching some X-Files tonight?" I sighed. Look, I've been trying to contact someone about this for a week. Let's say hypothetically that I'm serious. Is there some sort of division or group for that? Let me just call Area 51, buddy. They'll take care of you. Come on, there has to be some guy that takes weird phone calls and checks them out, right? Aw, that's no fun. Fine, I'll give you the number. I had it. Finally, I had it. The next conversation I had was promising, and a military jeep showed up the next morning. Idil texted me when she saw it parked on the street, and I hurriedly went outside to greet one man, apparently. He was only slightly older than me, and he stood staring at the black square with a haunted gaze. As I finally got his attention, he turned his head to look at me and said, "Motherfuck!" Right? I pointed down the street at the black square. That thing's been sitting there like that for a week and a half. Finally prompted to move, he went to the back of his Jeep, pulled out a tripod and a camera, and set it up facing the anomaly. Watching him, I asked, "So you're going to call in the big guns, right? Someone will take care of this?" His only answer was a glance, and then he got in his Jeep and drove off, leaving the equipment running. That was progress, I told myself. Somebody was aware of the issue now, and somebody was on it. Small consolation as the days wore on. One of the neighbors boarded up their windows, and then everyone did. Nobody asked the first house to do it if they had seen or heard something scary. We just did it. That day, we went to the hardware store, endured the awkward process of explaining what we were doing to the overly helpful employees, and then took our boxes of nails and stacks of wood and began hammering into the window frames. I winced at the first one that went awry and damaged the wall, but I figured our security deposit was long gone anyway. We kept the curtain between the glass and the wood so that the landlord wouldn't notice on casual drive-by, although he would certainly see that the entire neighborhood had suddenly acquired bars and boards. If the area went to shit, would he lower our rent? Doubtful. Then my roommates and I got drunk together for the first time in months. The neighbors were doing the same thing in their boarded-up houses and on their lawns, and eventually we had a sort of block party going. It was an eerie thing, all being connected and bonded by a common threat, but being unable to mention that threat even as it loomed in the distance at all times. There was nothing we could do about it, so mentioning it publicly was impolite. As dusk deepened and someone started a bonfire in their backyard, I almost couldn't stand the pressure of what was happening. That thing might turn deadly and kill us all at any time, but I wasn't even allowed to mention it without pissing people off. boarding up our house, we were all reacting to it. We were all aware it existed, and we all knew everyone else knew too, but we couldn't talk about it? A weird defensiveness was emerging among the conversations I heard. This was our street, and none of us could afford to move away. Therefore, the black square had to be harmless. There were even people talking about the idea that there was nothing wrong at all, and that talk was growing. Agitated, I left the block party. I still wanted to drink, but angrily now, so I went to the nearest bar and sat. By pure chance, to my left was the soldier who'd set up the camera equipment. He was half sloshed already, and he looked sidelong at me while holding the bar to keep himself up. He laughed darkly. "Oh, it's you." It was almost a relief to see that he was still in town. "You guys going to do anything about the black square once you collect enough info?" He sat taller and focused his bloodshot eyes on me. "Guys?" "Yeah, your team or whoever." "It's just me." "Oh, well, how about the higher-ups?" He downed another shot that had just been delivered. "Higher-ups? My whole department got cleaned out by the new administration to cut costs or something. I'm the only guy in my entire building." My beer arrived, and I took a sip of it while trying to fully understand what he meant. "Like, temporarily? Are you, waiting for new hires?" He gave an exaggerated shrug. "It's been 7 months, and nobody talks to me or tells me anything. I just get a paycheck automatically. No emails, no nothing. I'm thinking maybe they just forgot to transfer me when they got the rest. I don't think anybody even knows I'm still here." That was an off-putting thing to hear. "Then what do we do about the black square?" He gave a long, drunk belly laugh. "Brother, there are 47 anomalies in Ohio alone, and I'm the only person in the state left in the department that handles that shit. Just be happy that yours isn't making people crazy or changing your muscle tissue into acid while you sleep." "What? Does that happen?" He stared forward at the venue's long mirrored back wall for a moment, moving except for the muscles in his jaw tightening as if he was grinding his teeth. After a tick, he suddenly reached over and clapped me on the back. "Nothing so dramatic as all that. I'm just playing." He got up, threw some cash on the bar, and began to stumble away. "Wait," I called after him. "What's your plan for the black square?" "Plan?" he yelled back on his way out the door. "You are on your own, brother." I skirted through the crowd and pushed out into the night. "And what about the 46 other anomalies?" He just kept walking, and soon became small in the distance. Was it really possible that there was nobody manning the defenses for things like this? Were we simply open to danger with no one to respond? Was the only working plan to hope that nothing bad would happen? What the hell kind of plan was that? I returned home even more agitated than before. It was about 3 weeks after the appearance of the anomaly that those that insisted the black square was harmless became the majority. We'd been able to complain about it, make jokes, and watch it fearfully before that afternoon, but the winds changed, and I immediately found myself on the outside with no warning. If I glanced suspiciously at the black square, someone would deride me for it. If I tried to measure it to see if it was growing at all, someone would come out on their lawn and tell me to stop and that I was wasting my time. By the 4th week, those reactions became veiled threats. Bill was standing out on the sidewalk the first day of that 4th week. I had just come home from playing a card game elsewhere, and he approached me rather angrily. "Stop causing trouble," he said without sugarcoating it. Me? He was a large man in multiple ways, and I took a step back warily. I'm just not willing to accept that the incredibly odd anomaly in the middle of our street is safe. "The black square isn't causing any trouble," he growled. "You're the problem here. Pissing people off, going against the grain. People want to sleep soundly, and they can't do that if you fill their heads with nonsense dangers." "If it's nonsense," I asked, "then why are your windows all boarded up?" He balled a fist. "'Cause that's how it's always been around here. Everybody does it, and always has." "What the hell are you talking about? It was just last month that—" He slugged me in the stomach. I backed away. There was nothing left to say. I understood exactly what was happening. He glared from the sidewalk until I went inside and closed the door behind me. 2 mornings later, screaming erupted from a few houses down. 9 of us rushed out of our houses with makeshift weapons. only to find that the danger had been the night before. Someone's window had been broken, and the wood beyond had been clawed mightily by something that had left traces of azure ichor behind. I thought that certainly it would be undeniable now. It was obvious that something had come out of that black square and tried to get into a house. The only reason the single father and his 2 girls were alive, they'd boarded up their windows like everyone else. "See," I said to those gathered, "I told you it's dangerous." But the single father in question shook his head. "Of course you'd say that. How do you do it?" I began backing away almost instantly as all eyes turned on me. "What?" Bill said. "Yeah, likely what happened. What tool did you use to make those marks? And what is that blue shit? Is it toxic? Did you put Ethan's girls in danger by throwing toxic blue sludge on their house?" Ethan added, "And you'll pay for that window, too." "The hell is wrong with you people?" I clutched my bat and continued moving backwards. Idil came out of her house then, and asked some of the others in the group what was going on in Somali. They backed off, but Bill and Ethan shot me hateful glances. On the way back to my place, Anton shook his head as I crossed the driveway. "Gonna get yourself killed, boy." Whispering, I asked, "What, by insisting that the physics-defying anomaly in our street is possibly dangerous?" "Just saying. I sit in front of this thing all day, every day, and it freaks me the hell out, but I don't say nothing to anyone else around here. Neighbors are more dangerous than the thing, get it? Keep your head down." I mulled over his words for another few days while the attitude in the neighborhood became openly hostile. More claw marks and strange azure liquids appeared during each night, and Bill started enforcing what he called his right to open carry by walking around on the sidewalks with an automatic rifle slung over his shoulder. And then Ethan started doing it too. It made me tense as hell, but they'd often talked about gun responsibility, and part of me was glad to have weapons around, given that something was probably coming out of the black square each night and trying to get into our houses. At 4 a.m. on the first night of the 5th week, I heard loud banging on the front door. For 20 minutes, I listened to someone pounding and yelling outside, until one of my roommates shouted from his bed, "Fuck off, Bill, we don't have to answer the door for you. We're not parked in your goddamn spot." The knocking went silent. My other roommate called from his room. That's the first time he's ever actually just gone away. At that, I sat up starkly in my bed. I knew, in that keening instant, I knew. Something had happened out there, some spark. Perhaps the unseen creature had finally gotten someone. Perhaps it had gotten one of the neighbor's children. I grabbed my baseball bat and put on my tennis shoes. Other than that, I was only in shorts and a t-shirt, but there was no time. Running into the dark hallway that connected our rooms, I whispered, "Get your gun out." "What?" my roommate asked. "Get your goddamned gun ready," I practically hissed. "They're coming for us!" There was a crash of glass and the sound of boards being ripped off the back of the house to punctuate what I'd said, and I heard my roommate jumping up and fumbling around with the case that held his gun. My other roommate just sat quietly and fearfully. "They're not coming for us, they're coming for you." In the dark, I heard his door close and lock. This was no movie situation. I knew this would end very quickly between untrained civilians, and I knew I was at a big disadvantage. If the windows hadn't been boarded up, I would have escaped that way, but I was forced into a corner. I only had knowledge of the terrain and the advantage of surprise. Using long steps to avoid the parts of the floor that creaked, I moved into the board game room, and a big silhouette moving around the corner became a wide-open target for my bat. I swung without restraint and as hard as I could. I'd never tried to kill anyone before, but I was amazed at how lethal my strength felt when the restraints were off. The bat snapped in half on Bill's head and he fell to the floor. He limply tried to resist, but I pulled at his rifle while screaming obscenities, and he gave it up while groaning on the floor and whimpering about his head bleeding. I'd won. But, unfortunately, there were 7 more silhouettes behind him. Ethan was among them, and I saw his face by moonlight as they dragged me out into the street. "This asshole nearly killed Bill," he shouted. "Proof positive he's the one behind the attacks." "You came into my house with guns," I screamed at them. "You goddamn psychopaths!" There were 20 other people out there already, many sticking to their own lawns. By the light of the full moon, they watched fearfully. Some of them asked if what I was saying was true. Ethan yelled over me, "He'll say anything to trick people. Fake news. Fake? They were still holding my arms, but I struggled. This is ridiculous. You've all got guns, and you literally just broke into my house in the middle of the night. Fake. Lies. Ethan insisted to the neighbors we passed as they kept pushing me and dragging me. As we passed Adele on her lawn, I realized where we were going. She ran forward and kicked at Ethan. I did not leave my country just for you to be the same. One of the men stayed behind to keep her restrained, and I nearly got away because of the distraction. Unfortunately, they caught me and continued moving me toward the black square. Even by moonlight, it was starkly visible. Why are you doing this? Ethan snarled. You know, you monster. I can't let you live after what you did to my little girl. I could see one of the wooden barricades among his windows had failed. Something had broken its way inside, and red blood was mixed with the azure pools usually left behind. So you're going to try to kill me by throwing me inside the black square? I asked loudly so that everyone around could hear. How does that make any sense if you insist it's not dangerous? That I'm the one that somehow orchestrated these attacks in the night? One of the neighbors screamed, Stop trying to get out of this. Fake news. She turned and insisted to someone else that I was a liar. Getting rid of him will stop the attacks. They were lost. I'd known it, but it was only now that I truly accepted that I was not in a neighborhood surrounded by peers. I'd been living in hostile territory, surrounded by enemies for weeks, and they'd become delusional because of their own fear. Living with fear every single day, and being unable to do anything about it had turned their fear to anger, and now anger had become violence directed at the only target they could actually reach, their neighbor. On that first night of the 5th week, they kicked me forward and pointed their guns at me, forcing me to walk into the black square, the unknown source of their fear. It had come to us from somewhere else, but it was now the desperate void at the center of our lives. It was our heart. I'd never felt more sharp and aware. Adrenaline seared fire through my every nerve as I kept moving forward, away from the guns at my back. The dark square expanded rapidly in my sight, but then grew more slowly as I came nearer than ever before. It asymptomatically filled half of the sphere of what I could see. I kept waiting to pass the threshold like a door, to see the sides that I'd tried to find with sticks and ropes over the last 5 weeks. But it never came. I kept pressing forward, only to find myself still half in the world I knew, and half in the darkness, until I turned around and saw Ethan and the others very far behind me. My brain struggled to process the shape or curve of what was happening, but I had the distinct sensation that I could keep walking forever, and the black square would remain a giant sail pressed against half of me. Except I knew there was an unseen drop-off, and perhaps that was the key. Perhaps the door was actually down, and the black square we could perceive was merely a higher dimensional perspective on it. I got down on my knees and hands and began to crawl. I couldn't afford to fall accidentally. Don't bother, Ethan shouted in the distance. You're going over. You're not getting out of this. There it was. I could feel the edge. Here, the black square was almost exactly half of what I could see around me. Directly above, to the right, to the left, and down. The paved street far beyond Bill's and Anton's houses, part of the street I'd stood upon many times coming the other direction, now met sheer void. But it wasn't dark. Light had always been coming up from below. There'd just been nothing for it to reflect from so that we could see it. Light came up from below now, illuminating my face, my eyes, my mind. It was a ghastly light. Certainly not ever a color that had graced our world before, and I could see everything by the cast of its deep glare. I'd never seen that color with the rods and cones of my eyes before, but I knew what it was. If you could open a door into the mind and observe the hues within, if you opened that door into the mind of a person being tortured, With perfect and exacting skill, you would see the chroma of pain. Not just the feeling of it, or the idea of it in thought, but the blood of the concept, the core as a brushstroke on existence. For some reason, I laughed, but I did not smile. I stood and began to walk back. Ethan held his assault rifle forward. "Don't you come back here! Don't you fucking do it!" I just shook my head. The other men behind him raised their guns too, but they were waiting on him. I didn't slow. I couldn't. As I moved toward Ethan, I told him, "You're human, Ethan. Fundamentally capable of good, or just neutrality, of cooperation, of peace." The words spilled directly from my raw brain and into the night air. You are not like what's over that edge. Take a look for yourself. You'll understand. The barrel of his weapon glimmered darkly by moonlight, but the square behind me was blacker. "What do you mean?" he asked after a moment, the strain of oncoming terror dampening his tone. I think he saw the look in my eyes. Some small fraction of what I'd seen had to still have been lingering in my irises, like a rotting reflection gone bad. "What's in there? What's over that edge?" I couldn't really think at that moment. I put my forehead to the barrel of his rifle and grasped for the trigger under his hands. "Please." He pulled away in fear. "You're crazy!" They were no longer a threat now. I drifted past them and back to my house, where one of my roommates peered out of his door and apologized, and the other finally finished finding his ammunition. "Danger's past. Don't bother," I murmured before going to my room and sitting on my bed. It took 6 days for my brain to develop a coping mechanism. For 6 days, I sat and stared at any blank white wall I could find. It was eye bleach in a way because it had every color and none. After 6 days, I felt nothing, and that was my release. To scab and scar over what had happened to my mind, my brain had amputated my emotions. And good for that. I would feel horrible at the loss of love, and joy, and friendship and companionship, but I can't. And that's better than feeling what I witnessed over that edge. Bill was back from the hospital by then, and feeling rather sheepish. A neighborhood watch had been set up, and armed men were taking turns guarding the black square, around which they'd built a wall out of bricks and cement. They knew that nobody would be coming to help. No police, no military, no government. We were on our own, a fact which made Idil sad, and she talked to me about the home she'd left, where it had been exactly the same in her village. "This is humans," I told her. "Sometimes we do better for a little while. Sometimes we don't." She didn't have a chance to reply before Bill came up and sat carefully down next to me on the porch. He rubbed his bandaged head and said, "Sorry about what happened last week." I kept watching my armed neighbors around the black square. "It doesn't matter." "It does, though," he muttered, looking downcast. "We could have killed you." "It doesn't matter," I said again. He swallowed audibly and then asked, "What did you see in there? Think the neighborhood'll go to shit now?" Now? It amazed me that it was right there. It was right there, just 100 feet away. We were alive and standing here, breathing air and eating food and having conversations just 100 feet away from that. It was always here, Bill. The only thing that changed 6 weeks ago is that we can see it now. We don't talk much anymore. The neighborhood is quieter than before. We just sit and wait for the inevitable, each day and each night. The black pit is among us, lurking in open sight, and one day it will spill forth ungodly hordes I don't need to describe, because you already know what they look like. Sometimes we do better. Sometimes we don't.
As you can plainly see, contact is not always a pleasure, listener. With that said, we with the Signal are always looking to connect to you. As such, we have developed a way of finding those who want that connection, who seek to join us. Please listen to the following. The first respondent to provide the correct answer to this week's test pattern will become the subject of our next local broadcast. And with that, I give you the test pattern.
Hello, and welcome to the test pattern. Decipher the code and return your answers to thisisthesignal@gmail.com. The first subject to do so will become the focal point of our next local broadcast. Today's cipher is 20, 18, 1, 14, 19, 13, 9, 20, 20, 9, 14, 7. Again, please submit all answers to thisisthesignal@gmail.com.
And with that, dear listener, it's time for us to leave you. Today, we've experienced the thrill of the chase, wondered at the fragility of human sanity, and pondered the nature of fear. And while those musings may have left you with more questions than answers, worry not, dear listener, because we'll be seeing you again very soon on The Signal.
Alex?
Dad! It's right behind me!
What is it? There's nothing there.
But, how?
Alex, is everything alright? When I woke up, the power was out, so I figured you were looking for the fuse box, but when it came on, I thought...
But I never thought... Dad, I thought I heard...
Alex, what's wrong?
Nothing, Dad.
Are you sure? I thought...
I said it's nothing, Dad. I just scared myself or something. I'm gonna go back to my room. See you later.
Well, if you want to talk about... Great, Miles. Just let him walk away. Again. Moron. New notifications from work email. Don't tell me that asshole purser has started burning the midnight oil too. 3 new instances recorded by receiver? Guess whoever's been broadcasting was busy tonight. Forwarding to Amy, and done. I'll check them in the morning. Probably nothing important. Jesus, Marie. I wish you were still here. You always knew how to talk to him. I'll make it up to him. I need to do better. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening. If you liked tonight's episode, please share, rate, and review our podcast. To support directly, check out our website at www.signalhorrorpodcast.com or check www.patreon.com/signalobscura. Tonight's narration and story readings come courtesy of Marie Mitchell, Ashley Webb Rice, and myself, Leslie Rice. Our music was provided in part by myself, but mostly by Kevin MacLeod. The rest of his work can be found at www.incompetech.com. Additional sound effects come courtesy of AR Sound Effects. Again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. After all, what's the worst that could happen?